All right, we're here for 10 good minutes. The subject is campaigns and elections, and we have fooled you because we respect you, but we still like to trick you every now and then. So for the second straight week, and this will be our final session, we're bringing in Karl Rove to talk about campaigns and elections. We tried to get one of the political science professors who actually knows something about campaigns, but they were all busy, so we decided to turn to Mr. Rove.
Hey, is that the only shirt and tie that you have? That
I had this sent out for dry cleaning and got this back.
Exactly.
You know, in a nanosecond.
Yeah. Well, you can generally get one day, not 1 week. I don't know what laundry you're using, but
well, with
generally you can get it back in 1 day.
With the legislature the way it is, we tend to wear one, at best 2 shirts for our teaching responsibilities. So yeah, we look painfully familiar compared to last week, but don't let that fool you. We've obviously had a lot of fun in the meantime. But so I wanted to bring in Karl to talk about the question of campaigns and elections, a larger subject. And we talked about political science, literature, and what they say, and this sort of minimalistic view of campaigns. I don't want to overstate it. It's not that political scientists don't think campaigns matter, but there is a strain that really sort of suggests that other factors, the economy,
impersonal forces,
right,
course through our society, make the decisions for us.
Right. Now, what do you think about that literature? How does it work in practice? What's your critique or non-critique of it?
Well, I think it's idiotic. Yes. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Look, things like people's perception of the economy matter, but at the end of the day, people go into the voting booth and try and make a decision informed by the information that they hear during the course of the campaign. And they're deeply influenced by outside, by the state of the economy, the condition of the world, their attitudes, their perspectives on both political parties. But campaigns matter. I mean, in 2000, the economy was good, the country was at peace, Bill Clinton was relatively popular. Why would people want to make a change? But they did. 2012, this was the election in which everybody was supposed to be all fired up and ready to go, and yet for the first time, in better than a decade, we have a decline in the absolute number of people who vote. And why? Because of the conduct of the campaign. So one side failed to energize a significant number of independent voters, and the other one helped them in that process by irradiating the challenger candidate and making him unacceptable to a group of swing voters. So campaigns do matter. Now, I'm not going to suggest that outside forces don't have an impact, but at the end of the day, what a candidate does, how a candidate conducts himself or herself, what the respective messages are, the effectiveness of the campaigns in persuading and mobilizing have a deep impact on the outcome of an election in most instances.
Excellent. Well, good. I'm glad there's somebody on the minority side of this debate,
well,
because that's been my...
You remember that scene out of George Patton? Where George C. Scott says, "Rommel, you magnificent bastard, I read your book." Well, I read your paper, so.
I think being called a magnificent bastard is pretty much
there we go, exactly.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
There we go.
Let's talk about another, common theme to the literature in political science. That's on negative campaign. Now, I've just as fair warning, I've already kind of critiqued the notion that positive negative is a huge oversimplification of what goes on. But having said that, as a practitioner, what do you think? What is negative campaigning, and does it work? Kind of give us your take on this.
Well, look, negative campaigning is generally contrast and comparison that doesn't work. It's a pejorative for that. But look, campaigns are about defining differences between candidates and between parties and philosophies, in part. The ability of a candidate to execute the job and differences in attitudes towards the policy outcomes that they would seek. And to some degree, you can do that by saying, here's what I'm for, but in politics, particularly modern American politics, it becomes easier for some candidates and some campaigns to define themselves more by what they're against. Right. Now, most of the time, people have a relatively high tolerance for that kind of stuff and filter out a lot of it. But sometimes, when people go too far with contrasting and comparing, it backfires, and there it becomes truly negative. It is, people have a sense of what's fair, what's appropriate, what they're willing to tolerate and accept, what they're willing to believe represents reality, and if you cross those thresholds, then they then hold it against you. But effective campaigning is a campaigning that really draws on the information that's in people's minds and resonates with what their instincts are. For example, one of the most powerful ads that was run in the 1968 presidential race was an ad that had one word on the screen, Agnew and 15 seconds of canned laughter, because during the course of the campaign, people had become convinced that Spiro T. Agnew, Richard Nixon's running mate, was completely, hopelessly inept and unworthy of being vice president. So they didn't say, hey, he's an idiot. They didn't say, here are all the stupid things he said. They simply had something that resonated with people's, the information that was in people's mind. I'm sure that you've talked in the class about the 1964 ad, Lyndon Johnson, Daisy ad, where literally Goldwater's name is never mentioned. It's Lyndon Johnson's voice saying, these are the stakes, we must either live to learn together as God's children, or surely we shall die together, and vote for President Johnson. Incidentally, those two ads were created by the same person, Tony Schwartz, who is a master Democratic ad maker.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I mean, we've talked a little bit about backlash and you know, sort of different forms of it. I've always sort of been of the opinion that a campaign in some sense would be irresponsible, especially running against an incumbent.
Right.
If you did not,
it did not compare and contrast. If you didn't say, here's what he or she has done wrong, and here's what I do differently. But again, in politics, sometimes the counterpunch is more powerful than the punch, because oftentimes when people punch in politics, they attack. They go over the top, because unfortunately most ads are constructed by true believers sitting in a studio someplace looking at focus group and polling results and egging each other on to go too far.
Interesting. Well, final question I wanted to ask you about is, you know, you've seen, for those of you who don't know, and I imagine most of you guys are 18 to 20, so you probably weren't around during this period of time, but Karl cut his teeth in Texas doing a lot of direct mail, the sort of personal communication. Actually, going back even a little further, this is sort of a, you know, what can I do with my political science degree? I believe Karl actually started as a college Republican back at University of Utah. Or,
University of Utah.
Right. So for those of you who think that you're too young, or you know you can't get a start, you know, in college, you know, think again. The sort of both benches, Republican and Democratic side, are stacked with people who actually began in college and started contributing to campaigns at that level. So, but for Karl, let's talk a little bit about that evolution, right? Since you were active in the 80s and then certainly into the 90s. Talk a little bit about how have campaigns changed? What do we do now that's different? Is it all television? How big
let's take a broader arc. Because let's go back to, it's 1860. We are really using, in essence, vast armies of people to go and convince other people, their neighbors, their friends, their communities, to support either the democracy or the Republicans. And then we began to have the growth of newspapers, particularly partisan edge newspapers. They've always been that way. But in the 1870s and 1880s, they began to have mass circulation, far in excess of what they've had historically, because literacy is rising. Then we have along comes the campaigns of education, where literally handouts and tracts and mailing pieces become important means of communicating message. Then we come to the 1920s and we begin to see radio, 20s and 30s and 40s radio. The first presidential campaign ads are run in the 1950s. Now we're seeing, and we've gotten far more sophisticated as time has gone on. You look at early TV ads and they look like very bad Saturday morning cartoons. But now we've gotten to the point where we've got a very interesting, in the last 15 years, the growth of the web. And I don't know exactly where we're going to end up with this thing, but I do have one crackpot theory. And that is that it's going to bring us full circle. If you take a look at whether it's the Bush campaign in 2004, where we were really pioneering micro-targeting and the use of the web to try and individualize the campaign, to have a volunteer be able to talk to a target voter, knowing as much as they possibly could about that target voter, even if they were unknown to them personally, to the Obama campaign and the Romney campaign, both of which had sophisticated efforts to match up volunteers and donors who looked, thought, and acted alike, like a target voter, or in the case of the Obama campaign, were even known to the voter because they had mapped the social networks. They'd gone to the Facebook page, the Twitter feed, their Instagram, et cetera, and mapped who were you in communication with, and then used the power of the microchip to sort of identify and link you with that specific individual. And if the target voter was unknown to anybody, to literally say, okay, we're not going to have the 30-year-old single male talked to by the 70-year-old blue hair. We're going to have him talked to by somebody whose characteristics, background, and attitudes largely match that individual. And it's ironic because it's bringing us exactly back to the style of campaigning that was outlined in a letter by a lanky lawyer in Sangamon County, Illinois in 1840. He was the chairman of the Whig campaign that year in Springfield, Illinois, and he wrote a a letter to his campaign committee saying, make a perfect list of the voters, ascertain with certainty for whom they will vote, have the undecideds talked to by someone they hold in confidence, and on election day make certain that every Whig is brought to the polls. Lincoln was a great president, but he was also a pretty good practical politician, and the most important part of that letter, in my opinion, has always been have them talked to by someone they hold in confidence.
That's terrific. And we've talked about, the phrase we use a lot is back to the future. I mean, this is a phrase I've used, and I think it's interesting in the study of voting, a lot of the work being done today draws on the communication literature developed in the 1930s about person-to-person contacting and how that motivates or doesn't motivate voters.
Yeah, and I don't think it's an accident that after the Jacksonian Revolution that we have relatively high rates of participation. And again, in the aftermath of the Civil War, when both political parties, particularly the Republicans, who are desperate to hang on as the black vote is snuffed out in the South, and the South has moved into from being competitive to being the solid Democratic South that we knew for the better part of the century. They are focused on how do we go about developing personal lines of communication with voters who are up for grabs.
Right. That's a nice transition. Before I let Mr. Rove leave, I'll point out that his next book project.
I can't say.
Oh, okay.
Can't say.
Okay. Well, let me just say it will have an academic historical bent to it.
There we go. Manuscript due April 1st. It's going to be a hell of a good read.
He's spending some time in the libraries and spending some time with us this morning, actually the last 2 weeks once again.
Great,
thank you very much, Mr. Rove.
Thank you, Daron.
All right. Thanks a lot. Now back to lectures.